Welcome back to Pop Goes the 60s, everybody. I have two guests today. I typically do one at a time, but this requires two. It's John Heaton and James Griffiths, writers of the new book, Lights, Camera, Beatle. And I'm very happy to be able to showcase this book. I know they've been working on it for, well, a couple of years, I think, right? Does that sound right, guys?
Longer.
Well, it's one of the things that I've been talking about in the last year plus is that, as we're waiting for other books to be written, and it seems like we're having less and less physical media to buy of our beloved Beatles. These are the type of things that get us through that period. And this is physical media, and I always promote reading actual books. So this is a good one, and I got done reading it and I really enjoyed it. And I'm not a big solo Beatles guy, but this is really well written and well laid out. And let me just tell the the viewers here what I liked about it. So what this typically covers, it talks about broadcast details, the director, official release dates, guest stars, all kinds of great information. So you guys really put your time into this, and I was very impressed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, give me a
Thank you.
little background on what inspired you to do this book and how you guys came to collaborate.
Well, I think we met in through YouTube, and then we both went to the Beatles convention in Liverpool 2022. And I don't know if it was there when we got the idea, but that we figured that no one had done this book, or there was a pretty poor attempt at doing part of this book up until 1980, I think it was, but no one had really fully covered it. So we thought, well, let's have a go.
Hmm.
And there
I
are,
think it was,
go ahead, James.
I think it was, I think John, my memory is telling me that John made a remark in a video, something along the lines of, it's still my ambition to write a book about the Beatles. I forget which video it was now.
Mm.
And I suppose I'd always had the same ambition, but I think in my mind, I'd always thought it will never happen because everything's been done, everything's been covered, every possible angle. And this idea just seemed to pop up out of nowhere. We just one day just went, how about doing something on the solo Beatle videos? And then it just kind of snowballed very slowly.
Well, it's an interesting topic because the videos were really until the MTV era when they became normal and it became a must for every new artist to really produce one. All these little ones kind of fell through the cracks. Maybe were shown on TV. Most were not seen, I would imagine, by people. So it was a very kind of an untold story, untold history. And your book covers 1970 to 1995. So why specifically did you end it at 95?
I think it was to save our sanity, really, because when you look at post 1995, obviously we've lost John by 1980, we've lost George, and I suppose it just does slightly become the Paul McCartney show from that point onwards. And McCartney is so prolific. That's not to say we won't do a volume two, but we kind of thought it's quite nice to bookend it, starting with Sentimental Journey. No, Instant Karma, I think we start with, don't we? And we move through and we end with the Real Love video.
Yes, so there are two
And
Beatle videos included in here because they fall within that
yeah,
frame, right at that
well,
95 period.
we kind of make the argument that they're not really Beatle videos. They're videos that take place simultaneously on the timelines of McCartney, Harrison, and Starr's solo careers. That's how we kind of pitch it. Obviously, John's not really there, so we do sort of count them as solo Beatle videos, Real Love and Free as a Bird, obviously. And because I think they're quite momentous videos in a way, they seemed like quite a good place just to finish and draw a line and say, okay, let's kind of leave the story there, but with the proviso that we could at some point pick it up again, pick up the story again, and carry on. But we'll see.
Yeah, I guess that would be kind of the McCartney show, although Ringo's done a couple along the way. And you cover some of his the time takes time period. I didn't even realize there were videos from that period. So you guys really, where did you go for your sources on this? So it was, I mean, YouTube makes it a little easier now, but was that your main thing, or what did you really start with? John, why don't you field this one?
Well, I mean, with McCartney, he's released the McCartney Years, which was a triple DVD. I think it was 2007 around there. where most of his videos were released officially, with a lot of notable exceptions like Merry Head Little Lamb.
Mhm.
But Ringo, the only videos that have been released are on his best of CD compilation, the best of Ringo, and there's only about four or five on there. Our main friend on this was YouTube, and for a lot of the Ringo videos, you can get them on YouTube, even though Ringo himself has willfully forgotten a lot of the videos he made. Sorry about the plane, guys.
Mhm.
And so yeah, if what you can do with this book is you can just literally read it and sort of watch the videos on YouTube, which a few friends of ours have said that they've done and enjoyed that kind of process. Um, for good or for better, for worse, because they're not all great.
In
So
terms of
go
sorry,
ahead, James. Go ahead.
just in terms of sources of information, there are various sources of information out there that we were able to draw upon. For example, the Beatles on Film website is a really good resource, and there are a few books here and there which do look at Beatle films and Beatle videos, but they tend to be a bit more um, general in their approach. So rather than just looking at videos, they also look at other kinds of TV appearances the Beatles have made. Um, so yeah, there's the Beatles Bible, the Paul McCartney Project. We were able to pull in information from lots of different places. Having said that, there are definite kind of gaps. Most of the gaps really relate to Ringo's mid 1970s videos, where it was virtually impossible with a few of them to track down much information at all. Even when we spoke to Nancy Andrews, of course, who was with Ringo during that period, and she does tell some quite nice stories for us in the book, about some of the filming. But even she's very hazy on things like, who actually directed these videos
Mhm.
and how were they put into production. And Ringo, of course, he's has either completely forgotten or he chooses not to recall it. So they're
Mhm.
very, very mysterious. There's this kind of seam of really strange videos, throughout the 1970s, which are quite low budget, quite funny, quite off the wall. Ringo looks progressively worse in each of them, for whatever reason. And it's virtually impossible to find out any information about them. So yeah, there are kind of intriguing gaps in the story, but we try to make a virtue of that.
Was that the most difficult part to cover? Was that Ringo period?
No, not really. No, I think we gradually realised that we were not going to be able to find this information. So,
Mm.
we weren't going to try and turn into Mark Lewis. You know what I mean? We were not going to start to get on a
Yeah.
plane and fly to Germany, and try and track down. It's not that kind of book, really. It was more
Mhm.
just, okay, if the information is there and we can find it. And we did try to push the boat out on occasion. We sort of looked in unusual sources. Say, for example, with George's This Is Love video, we were able to do a bit of tracking down of, some friends of George out in Hawaii, because the video was filmed in Hawaii. And we were kind of able to make some interesting
Mm.
little incursions into doing a little bit of research in the kind of Hawaiian newspapers that are online and that kind of thing. And, tracking down things like an interview with the Australian actress Susan Smithers, who apparently was the Australia's first ever supermodel, when she appears in George's video for True Love, where they're
Okay.
both on the punt, going through George's garden. And we found some quite interesting interview stuff with her, which was, I think, from some Australian magazine, from the
Oh,
1970s. So it was a journalistic enterprise, but as I said, there are gaps which we were just never going to be able to fill. But no, I know those Ringo ones were good fun. They weren't hard work.
okay. Well, that's pretty deep diving and getting articles from Australian supermodels and things, and that's going below, I think, further than most people would go with regard to these solo videos, and it does give the book a lot of um, a lot of depth, I think, and you include locations, and that's always a thing I think a lot of people are interested in, so they can revisit those places that those where those videos were shot. And I know you personally visited some of those locations. Do you have any favorites?
Well, my favorite was going to Lim Castle in Kent. When was it? About a year ago now. And we went to all the Back to the Egg video locations in the castle, in the grounds of the castle, or in the surrounding fields. And we were mostly successful in tracking those down. Maybe not exactly pinpointed where they were made, but pretty much. The room where you can have lunch today at Limp Castle, you can just walk in from the street and have lunch, and there's a back to the Scotch egg on the menu for £9. And the room where you have lunch is actually the room where Paul McCartney looks out of the window and performs Love Awake on the Back to the Egg video. And
Okay.
then the Great Hall in Limb Castle is where they performed Old Siam Sir. So you feel really, it's very nostalgic for a Wings fan to go there. And you can stay the night there if you want. You can have a wedding, or you can just
Mm.
pop in for lunch like we did.
Well, that is one of the benefits of this book, where you give all that information so people could use that as their guide to go to those locations, which is pretty cool. I imagine people do go to those locations and take pictures there all the time. I see a couple on Facebook here and there, but I don't live over there, so it's a little harder for me to get there.
Yeah, there's a plaque on the wall, isn't there, John, on the Fountain pub where they filmed the Wonderful Christmas Time video, where you visited as well, didn't you, John? You had lunch there too, didn't you?
Yeah, there is. I mean, but yeah, a lot of people, well, I'd say some people visit these places, but I mean, it's taken me the best part of 50 years to go and see them. So
Mm.
it, they've been there the whole time. I just haven't made the effort to go down there. And they're not very far from where my mother lives in Wimbledon,
Okay.
And so Colin and I got in the car and went down to Sussex, and we were joined by Henry and went over to Kent and went to Camber Sands, which is on the coast of Sussex, where they filmed the Baby's Request video, and then you up into Kent, and it's all. And then we also passed by Hog Hill Studio, where Real Love was recorded, and we saw that. That's in the middle of the countryside. Um, so nice little tour if you live in the southeast of England. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go through each solo Beatle and see if you guys have a kind of a favorite or a video that really stands out. So, James, let's start with you and pick any solo Beatle you like. If there's one particular video that you've always really admired or something you thought there's something special about it.
Um, well, I'll let John talk about Mull of Kintyre. I mean, we do both identify the first Mull of Kintyre video
Oh,
as
okay.
our all-time favorite, but because it was the first one we each saw, really, and it was our kind of gateway into into the world of the Beatles and McCartney. But the one I'll highlight, that I think really jumps off the screen still, is the video for Coming Up,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
which was one of the earliest ones that Paul did with a guy called Marcus Keith of the company Keith and Co, who was quite a well-known album jacket photographer and a video maker in the kind of early to mid 80s. And he did a great job because, I mean, Paul, I think, I suppose like all the Beatles, Paul was feeling his way really through the 1970s. And there's a few kind of low budget clunkers along the way. London Town in 1978 is a particular embarrassment really in Paul's catalogue of videos. Even though it was directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg, who you'd think would know what he was doing, it's this very sort of amateurish, low grade, rather embarrassing video.
Yeah.
And then Paul started working with this guy called Keith McMillan, and he just raised his game massively. And towards the end of the 70s, heading into the early 80s, you get this really nice little run of videos. And I think Coming Up is the most spectacular one where Paul plays all these various characters. He's there as Hank Marvin, uh, Ron Mayle from Sparks, John Bonham, and as himself as well, of course, this kind of eternally youthful Peter Pan of pop,
Mm.
just
And his old
absolutely,
self I remember the old Paul showing up in there to the Beatle
yeah.
Paul. Yeah, I
There's some
remember that
pro
one well.
there's some priceless sort of shots of them, sort of reacting to each other, Beatle Paul reacting to modern Paul. But that video was incredibly difficult to make. It took hours and hours and hours and loads of lighting changes because they had to make sure that the lighting matched each time. So they'd film each ball essentially, and they'd have to try and get the lighting
Oh,
together.
yeah.
And they did it with this thing. I think it was called the chroma key system, which was a kind of early form of blue screen essentially.
Hmm.
So it was just an example of a really ambitious video. Um, and it was just really spectacular and just worked a treat. And obviously, it gave him a huge hit single.
For sure. Yeah, that's one of the early ones I remember seeing. So that's, I guess, early MTV days is probably when I saw that. Is that about right?
Just before MTV. I mean, it
A
was
couple of
Yeah,
years
1980.
before.
a couple of years. Yeah, and I remember seeing coming up. Maybe it was when MTV was already up and running because as I recall, MTV needed as much content as they could get together because there was not people weren't doing videos. So they had to go back into some of the older years, and that's probably how I saw coming up. I do remember seeing Ebony and Ivory as well, which would have been a year or two later. That was another one that I remember in real time, because we didn't have cable television until quite a bit later, so we were not early adopters of that. So I'm trying to think of where I saw that. Maybe they were airing some of that on television. I can't quite remember.
It was quite funny going back to the Ebony and Ivory video because I think John and I both agreed that the only parts of it that we remembered from back in the day was just the shots of Paul and Stevie at the piano keyboard.
That's all I
Those are the
remember
parts
too.
that, yeah, but
Yeah.
there's all these other sequences that we completely had forgotten about. It's,
Hmm.
it's really interesting the way that the memory fades over time. I mean, there's actors in there, there's, dancers, and there's various motifs. These huge giant piano keys, and you see them walking along, and Paul sits on E flat, and Stevie rests himself on, whatever C sharp or whatever, and it's this
Okay.
whole great big production, and yet in your memory, really all that survives is just this weird composite shot of Stevie and Paul not even together in the same room, kind of composited together using technology. But I
Hmm.
mean, again, a really memorable video and again, a really huge hit. So
Yeah.
it's not a coincidence, I don't think, that these videos were really great and, they really did the job in terms of selling the song.
Yeah, that one, Ebony and Ivory, that always struck me as a regular, more of a high budget video as opposed to some of the others that we had seen. Even when I remember the Stones doing "Start Me Up," that was look laughably amateurish. Even when I saw it then, like, okay, this isn't the Stones got some work to do here to come up to meet the level of the new bands and their videos because some of the older bands didn't quite get it. But McCartney, I think he kind of had ideas for this kind of stuff. So the coming up video is a perfect example. And then that kind of sharing the piano, which they shot, as I recall, in completely different countries, I think. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. John, what do you have to say? What videos stand out for you and any favorites?
Well, we've talked about Paul quite a lot, so I'm going to talk about George. And the highlight for him, video-wise, was 1976 for, I know it's one of your favorites, Matt, 33 and a third.
Oh, yes.
He came up with no fewer than three promo videos for this song, Crackerbox Palace and True Love. And they're all very highly inventive. They involve Eric Idle from Monty Python, a couple of them
Mhm.
anyway. Ron Woods makes an appearance, and very strong on humor. As George's, that's basically his starting point for any video he made. But regardless of the song, he tries to make it humorous, and he got off to a very good start, if belatedly, with "Ding Dong Ding Dong" in 1974. And in 75, didn't he do a video for his hit single "You," which was a shame. But in 76, he hit the ground running, and it's just great because you get, as a fan, you get a sneak peek into his wonderful Gothic mansion, Friar Park, and it's high production values. You've got the wonderful use of the gardens of Friar Park with the stepping stones on the lake, and it's just that would be a real highlight for me. That peak of George. Unfortunately, later on in the 70s, he kind of lost interest again. But
Yeah, I guess, and I don't know why he did. That's unusual for him to have done three for that,
Mm.
but I don't know why he just was excited about it, or I don't know what happened because he went. His next album didn't come out for another about 3 years, I think. The
I think
self-titled album.
sorry, I think two of the videos were probably shot on the same day. I think Crackerbox Palace and True Love, I think, were probably filmed over one weekend. So maybe there wasn't a huge amount of time commitment from him. I mean, what's interesting about those videos, I think particularly with this song, and we discovered this as we got into it, that in trying to tell the story of the Beatles videos, you actually do end up telling the story of the solo years because there are so many interesting and pivotal moments. So obviously, this song tells the story in a way of George's this kind of endless lawsuit, which George was
Yeah.
locked into for so many years. And the way that that video is constructed, I mean, it's a kind of send up or a parody of exactly what George had to do in real life, which was to go into court with his guitar and literally, demonstrate to the judge, how he'd written the song, and he completely sends that up, and it's really, really spectacular. It's done so well with, everybody, jumping up and all this mad stuff starts
Hmm.
happening, and the judge banging his gavel, in time to the music, and the stenograph player starts to, mime the keyboard solo, and it's just absolutely fantastic. As John says, just a really brilliant, inventive video. And I think George, I mean, obviously, in later years, George, became a film mogul. He was clearly interested in film and in narrative, and yeah, just a great little splurge of invention from him in the mid 70s, which then, unfortunately, as John says, tails off a little bit.
Yeah, that was kind of his last period where well, the songs on 33 and a third weren't big hits, so I assume those videos were shown on American television. And if they were, it probably didn't do a whole lot to help promote the singles. Those singles didn't wind up in the top 10. So it was a little bit, although there was somewhat of a comeback album from the prior to it, chart-wise, it didn't do much for the singles. And then he took some time off, after which he kind of, lost some steam. But I don't know what the promo videos I assume are used to just show on television to help promote the album, and I don't know how widely they were shown. Do you guys know any of that information?
I'd have to delve back into the book to find out exactly when it was shown. It certainly was shown,
Hmm.
but quite where I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I mean, there was a kind of general diminishing interest in George in the UK in the 1970s, for reasons that I suppose we don't need to go into here. I mean, I know that you've covered this fairly extensively in your chats with John over the years, but yeah, I mean, those videos would have been shown. I mean, Crackerbox Palace was first aired on Saturday Night Live, actually, NBC, in November 76. This song was again shown on Saturday Night Live. That's where they both debuted.
Okay.
But then, of course, after that, there's, unless we were to go really insane with research, we haven't, tracked down every time it was shown thereafter. But
But it couldn't have been shown too much. I mean, there's only so many places it could be shown. So, I mean, you got that one big chance on Saturday Night Live, which was huge. So that'd be the place you want to show it. But after that, it probably that really diminishes your opportunities.
well, in the UK, there was always spots where you could see music videos. Back in the 1970s, you could turn on the TV, during the day, and even just with three channels, BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV, they would show videos on children's programs on Saturday
Hmm.
morning, and I mean, they would turn up. But I mean, I don't recall seeing a George video. The first Beatle video I ever saw was Mull of Kintyre, 1977. That was the first time I ever laid eyes on a Beatle,
Okay.
and that's the same for John as
Hmm.
well, which is quite a strange coincidence, really.
Hmm. Yeah, and that song escaped me entirely because it wasn't a hit over here. But yeah, I think for me, I think I really paid more attention in George Harrison's Cloud Nine album. And by that time, obviously, MTV had been in full flight for a number of years, and in the 80s, the Beatles, the ex-Beatles were able to, well, except for Ringo, really, he wasn't doing too much then. George, I thought, did some really good videos, and again, with the humor on the Cloud Nine stuff, that's when I really, and he was kind of making fun of, video making within that too. So that I appreciated. So it was really interesting to see them doing, be basically meeting the industry in the video game. McCartney had done, well, he'd done a full-length feature film, but for some reason, the videos after Ebony and Ivory for me from McCartney, I don't remember those well. So I don't know why I remember Harrison so much. I think they were just played so much more. And he had bigger hits actually on that Cloud Nine album. So that's probably why I remember them more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
well, I mean, go on,
I,
John.
Pipes of Peace was a #1 hit in the UK, but I think I'm right in saying it wasn't a single in the US, and they went for So Bad, and which was a kind of minor hit. So you might have seen the video for So Bad,
I
but
remember that one.
yeah, but after that, Broad Street, Spies Like Us, Once Upon a Long Ago, not big hits in the US at all, and not very big hits in the UK either. So George was when he came back was actually outselling McCartney, which was very unusual and probably
Yeah.
a bit of a wake up call for Paul. Uh, oh dear, I better go and make a decent album before I go on tour, kind of thing, which is what he did with Flowers in the Dirt, I think. So
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right about that because Harrison all of a sudden just out of nowhere, it seemed like it was this huge comeback and that he
Mm.
had been gone for years, but it was only 5 years that it had been since his prior album. But in those days when we were younger, it just seemed like eons
Mm.
in between. And for some reason, I don't know why Harrison, well, at that time in the 80s, you had this nostalgic look back at the psychedelic period. You had Pepper that was the 20th anniversary in 87. And then Harrison ended up doing When We Was Fab. That's kind of a pastiche to that psychedelic period as well. So he was really kind of hitting on all cylinders, I think. And McCartney, I think, was trying to get in on that. And he had a little work to do because of some of the failures he had. The Broad Street thing didn't go so well, and Press to Play was a little bit of a rough spot for him as well. So, yeah, I guess it all kind of happens in waves, and the wave was positive for George Harrison at that time.
We actually interviewed Kevin Godley of
Okay,
Godley
yeah.
and Cream, who directed the When We Was Fab video. And he said some interesting things. He said that he didn't perceive it as being a comeback. He said that George, I think I asked him specifically, I said, did it seem to you when you were making that video that George was kind of, laser focused on, trying to make this big comeback? And he said, no, absolutely not. He said, that's not the impression I got at all.
Hmm.
It just seemed like George was just up, for having some fun essentially, which was, I think, was always George's nature in a way. He was quite fun loving.
Yeah, I think
Um,
he would always take the piss out of himself, in order to put it across. He doesn't come across as real serious or trying to be that serious. So I think that always worked in his favor.
Yeah, yeah. He tried to. Well, he wanted to work with Godley and Cream, but he was a bit scared of working with them because he said that they were a pair of loonies. But then he did decide to go with them for When We Was Fab. But apparently, what happened was they almost backed out of doing it. They'd cooked up this idea for this mad, wacky video, with arms coming out of the wall and everything. And then they just completely lost faith in it, like kind of one day before the filming, and panicked and just came around to his house and said, "No, George, we can't do it. We can't do it." And he just said, I sent them off into the garden and just said, look, have a cup of tea, calm down, come back, it'll be fine. And that's what they did, apparently. They went into the garden. Was it a cup of tea they had, or was it something stronger? I don't know. But they came back anyway, and then they shot the video and it was fine. So
Yeah, that's probably always been my favorite video of the solo Beatles, just because of the arms and how Paul makes his appearance and everything. It was a lot of fun, and it just hit a spot for me at the time, and that was a fun period for me because I didn't think I don't know what I was thinking up through it because McCartney was coming out with regular material through the 80s. Ringo was kind of done, John was gone. And George, I guess, took a hiatus. I hadn't heard from him in a while since all those years ago. Really was the last hit here in the States. Gon Troppo didn't do anything here, so it was really interesting to see him come back and have a #1 hit here, and then the follow-ups. So it was a lot of fun. And then the Traveling Wilburys, which was also hugely successful. So yeah, he was really, I don't know how that all happened, but he had a brief period there in the late 80s where he was on top of the world again.
Yeah, one of the things you may have noticed in our conversations so far is we haven't really focused on John Lennon, and that's partly because we lost him in 1980, but partly because there really weren't a great number of videos that he did, and we were lucky to have what we have, and we actually sort of bent the rules a little bit to include a few more than we would normally have included. For example, we included the Top of the Pops performance of Instant Karma, and we included a couple of Old Grey Whistle Test performances of Stand By Me and Slipping and Sliding, because if we hadn't included those, we would literally have had Imagine and very little else. So he and for starting over his comeback single in 1980, believe it or not, he didn't have a video ready to go to promote that single, but he had walked around Central Park with Yoko in late November, and they used that footage for the Woman, what turned out to be the Woman video in early '81, and that's a priceless video, very nostalgic, very point, not nostalgic, sorry, very poignant, and obviously very extremely sad. But so we cover that video, but John is sadly pretty much absent from the book, unfortunately.
Was there no video for starting over?
Not at the time, no.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. They didn't have one ready to go, but I don't know how people approach. Well, that was early days, pre-MTV, so you wouldn't maybe have that ready to go to coincide with a single release. I think that was all new territory.
It was interesting reading about the recording of the Imagine video, not the Imagine video, the Woman video, sorry, because the director Ethan Russell, he'd wanted John to do some lip syncing, to just lip sync, and John just really was not having it at all, essentially. And I think he made that comment, didn't he, John, about not wanting to be like Mick Jagger. He didn't want to be this sort of performing monkey almost. He just
You
wanted to have
know,
some dignity.
I think he would have been very happy to be Mick Jagger at that stage, actually.
Possibly, yeah. And I think it's sort of interesting dynamic that Ethan Russell says was going on. He seemed to get the impression that Yoko was not exactly micromanaging John, but maybe it was Yoko that didn't want him to lip sync, and John was going along with that. I don't know. I mean,
Mm,
we weren't there. We don't know these things, but it's quite an interesting entry because I think Ethan Russell has gone on record, in some detail about the shoot for that video, and as John said, it's an incredibly sad video to watch now, particularly because Yoko cut in some scenes of her in January '81, obviously after the shooting, and she's kind of there in Central Park, and it cuts back and forth between January '81 and December 1980. So you get the shots of the two of them walking, and then just a few weeks later, Yoko sat on her own, which is almost unbearable, really, and
mm,
it's pathos, I suppose.
yeah. Mm. Yeah, I
And
guess I didn't really consider and there was a video. Was there one put together for Nobody Told Me?
well, only after the event. I mean, not.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's a posthumous single. Yoko did come up with videos for starting over, and Nobody Told Me, and Borrowed Time, and Stepping Out and stuff. But they're not weren't made with John's involvement, so they don't really
Mm,
count. I don't think.
okay.
We tried to
Yeah.
steer away in general from videos that were kind of montage based, and there are quite a few of those, where they just go into the studio and just chop together some footage. Ringo did one of those later on. The big exception we made was City Love Songs with Wings, because we felt that that video, which is a complete composite, it's just various shots of various Wings shows. It was that if we didn't have that, there was a kind of huge chunk missing from the story, because we're trying to tell the story of the solo years, really, in a way, video
Hmm.
by video, frame by frame, is what we
Hmm.
say in the book. But if you don't have City Love Songs, that whole period in the mid '70s where Paul's career just went off into the stratosphere isn't there, and it doesn't quite seem right. It goes from sort of
Hmm.
Helen Wheels and Mary Had a Little Lamb, and then all of a sudden you're into Mull of Kintyre. It's kind of like, whoa, what's that?
Yeah.
So we included the Silly Love Songs video, even though it's just clips essentially.
I assume that because he was touring, he maybe didn't feel the need to, send a video out to promote his work since he was touring. Is that a fair assessment?
Uh,
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
other singles from that period, like Letting Go and Venus and Mars Rock Show, um, and Let 'Em In, all accompanied, if anything, by just concert footage. And as you said, yeah, no need to make videos. But Silly Love Songs, an attempt was made to kind of follow them around on aeroplanes, and quite nice to see Joe English and Jimmy McCulloch reading a book and stuff like.
Mhm.
yeah, we actually make the point in the book. There was I think a story has emerged in more recent years that Jimmy was obviously he was constantly running amok on tour. I think he'd injured his finger, hadn't he, in a barroom brawl or something. And so funny because in that video he's seen in the on the plane reading a paperback book. So it's
Mhm.
obvious that he's been reined in,
Yeah. Mhm.
So even a video like that where you're just dealing with found footage or stuff that they've chopped together, it's you can see interesting things going on if you look carefully.
So, what was the most challenging part in putting this book together? Because you've worked on it over several years. Obviously, a good book can't be written quickly. So, what was the most challenging part? And you guys weren't even in the same country when you were working on this stuff. So, that's also a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, during the writing of the book, I lost a parent, changed careers, moved house, and put my older son to university. So that gives you
Wow.
some sense of the time scale and just the sheer range of stuff that was going on. I'd say I'd say for a book like this, it's trying to get the facts straight. I think is one of the most challenging things because you
Mhm.
can't get any two sources to agree about anything. I mean, we've both got Keith Badman on the shelf and we've both got various other books, but I know there are quite a few occasions when John and I were madly messaging back and forth, saying, well, Keith Badman says that this happened on this date and this writer says it happened on that date and he says it happened here. The shoot was in Liverpool. This source says it was in London. This source says they don't know when it was. So trying to synthesize all that and we're not saying that we've got it right. We're just saying this is our best shot at trying to synthesize all these disparate strands of information, and then obviously trying to check and check and check and check and make sure that I think the scary thing with a book like this is you don't want to drop any big clangers.
Very true. Yeah, and but I mean, I don't think you got to kind of take some risks here and there, and you can explain it away a little bit. Well, this is the best information we have, and
Yeah.
still kind of get the idea across without committing to something like this is the absolute truth. But I think most fans would be okay with that. So not much else you can do.
No, and I think with Beatles history, I think as you say, it's largely accepted now by the fans that it is just this kind of tapestry of like a mixture of facts and hearsay and fantasy, and we all kind of accept it now. And there's all
Mhm.
this interesting stuff where Paul, where McCartney now says, well, I know the truth of what happened because I was there, and then he'll say something which just completely and flatly contradicts
Right.
every piece of evidence that we have. So
Yeah, I think the main thing, with the history of this period of, any music stuff, there's kind of some things that you can get right is more of a wider view, and some of the details maybe don't matter that much. They may matter in some instances, but in the wide overall story, sometimes those things don't make that much. They're not that impactful. The idea is, well, in this case, well, this video was shot around this time. This is the best location we can get, and these are the details surrounding it. That's really what you guys have done, and I think from going through the book, you've done it very well. I was surprised how dense the book was and filled with information.
well, thank you. Yeah, yeah, it's nice to know that that you've not spotted any clangers so far.
No, I have not. And I'm not an expert on their solo career either, but I mean, I have a good feel for the timeline and the albums and the hits and everything else. Let me ask you, because how did you guys decide on the cover? You had some renderings here of the four guys with McCartney prominently out front. How did this come to be?
I think John, I think we discussed that it needed to be Mull of Kintyre on the front. I think we had a discussion about that because it's our favorite video. I can't actually remember now.
Yeah, it was either going to be that or Imagine, and I think we both went for sentimental reasons for Mull of Kintyre, even though it was not a hit in North America. So
Yeah. I mean, the concept of, Ringo sitting on the letters and George behind. I mean, the cover was done by a friend of mine, Mark Follows, who's a, a really old friend of mine, from back in the day, going back 30
Hmm.
years or so. And he's a really good artist, as in he can draw, he can paint, he can sculpt. He's just one of these all-rounders, and he can also do stuff with computers. And with copyright, obviously, we didn't want to have any photographic cover problems with licenses or being sued. So I just pitched the idea to him. What about trying to do a sort of composite? And he basically just came back with this idea. And I mean, we just looked at it and went, Wow, yeah, fantastic. Yeah, do that kind of thing, and yeah, I think it works really well.
Did you look into the costs of what an actual photograph would have cost you to put on the cover? I'm not too familiar with that.
I didn't look in too much detail this time. I did write a book previously. I've written a biography of the band Squeeze
Hmm.
that came out a few years ago now. I've paid £300, I think, to license a photograph of them for the cover of that book. Now, whether I needed to do that or not is another question. It's one of these
Right.
things where you almost take a gamble. It's like maybe I could just not pay that money and see what happens,
Yeah, yeah.
or maybe I should just pay the £300. With this one, we do use a lot of photos throughout the book, but
Mm.
they're all from the Wikimedia Commons website where it's all free. So we have lots and lots of pictures of locations, guest stars, that kind of thing, but they were all free to use. So that was marvelous.
Okay.
Apart from that I took, right, James, with Henry in
Sorry, yes, John.
17.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we have some drawings in there too from a friend as well. So there's this kind of mixture of stuff in there, mixture of styles and things
Yeah.
to look at. It was John's idea. I mean, I gave John full credit because when I did the Squeeze book, I didn't have any pictures inside the book because I just thought it would be a nightmare. And even though the book did really well, one of the main bits of feedback I got from readers was it would have been nice to have some photographs. And my instinct this time was again not to have any because I just didn't want to be dealing with licenses or anything. But
Mm.
John was really firm about it. He put his foot down and said, "No, we need photos." And I think that was absolutely the right decision because it just breaks up the text and just gives you a different perspective.
Well, having written a book on Squeeze, that gave you a little leg up on how to get this thing published. And what is it like getting a book published for the first time when you're haven't written anything before? How hard or easy is that?
Well, it depends what you mean by publishing. So this book and the Squeeze book are both done using the KDP Amazon Print on Demand service. So it's not the traditional way of, approaching an editor, trying to get a publishing
Mm.
deal. I have written one book that was done that way. I did a book on Queen that was done by the publisher Sonic Bond. But there's all kinds of pitfalls with that approach. One of the main ones is that when you have a book published with what's called a proper publisher, obviously they have complete ownership of it. And what normally happens is that there's a print run and then the book goes out of print essentially, and nobody can buy it apart from on eBay for like, $30 or whatever. With this approach, even though possibly we won't sell as many copies as if we had a big publisher behind us, promotional stuff, this book will always be in print for as long as we want it to be. It'll never disappear. It'll always just be there. And we have complete control over it. There was nobody telling us what we could or couldn't do, or that cover is not right. You need to do this. You need to do that. I mean, it's just we didn't want anything like that at all. So this is the route that we went down.
Well, excellent. And there's a few photos inside. You guys even make an appearance or two. It's kind of nice. So yeah, John, tell me a little bit about this because this is your first book, correct?
Yeah.
So tell me what's is it something you would do again? I mean, is something that you found is something that you really enjoy doing and got satisfaction? And would you have another book in you?
Yeah, I mean, for most of my career, I've been a finance guy, and I did okay at that, and it was, put the bread on the table and whatever. But this has been music's always been my passion, so I'm probably more proud of this book than anything else in my whole career. And yeah, if this book does well, then there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't do a volume two or do something else on another topic. It's been a joy. It's been hard work at times, but it's been a labor of love for the most part.
Yeah, and I've said that several times on my channel where the fans are going to be producing the best stuff because they are labors of love. And it's not like you're doing it in order to get rich or it's necessarily putting the food on the table. It's something in addition to that. And the only way you could do it is if you have a labor of love. So I think this is an example of what we're going to be seeing from a lot of fans, I think, going forward because the conventional way, I mean, Apple wouldn't put something together like this, or who would, except for a fan. So I think this is a good example of that.
And the other thing to mention is we've deliberately not been sycophantic. So we've covered all of the videos, whether they're good ones, whether they're medium ones, or whether they're stinkers. And there are a couple of stinkers in here. And there's people have said that they didn't even know a video existed for Photograph, which is one of Ringo's biggest hit singles, number one in the US, top five in the UK. And it's an absolutely dreadful video.
Mm.
And it was, having said that, it's quite amusing to watch. If you can hear me above the plane, it's quite amusing to watch because it's so bad. And George Harrison also made a catastrophically bad video for Blow Away, which is one of his best songs of his entire career. And he suddenly felt the need to be sitting on top of a giant plastic duck or a giant donkey, trying to be funny and failing.
Yeah, sometimes their humor did not work, and that's a good example is the Blow Away video. Yeah, I was really disappointed to see that when I did see it.
That video was directed by Neil Innes, I
Oh,
think,
was it?
wasn't it?
Okay.
So it was just probably an attempt at a humorous video that went wrong. We do make the point in the book several times that the trick to a great video is that it's got to complement the music. So the music and the visuals, they have to complement each other and be an absolute snug, perfect fit. And humor, you have to be very careful with humor. You have to choose the song correctly. So, for example, Ding Dong has a humorous video, which is this weird, wacky sort of home video with all these strange characters. But it works fine because it's a humorous song. It's a light-hearted song, whereas Blow Away is not really a light-hearted song. I mean, it's a nice song, but it's not a kind of
Mhm.
jokey song.
Right. Yeah, it's more like a Here Comes the Sun type of song. And how do you put a joke to Here Comes the Sun, without looking ridiculous, So,
Yeah, and I mean, McCartney did it a couple of times. He had My Brave Face, which is this very sort of, sort of emotionally turbulent song about a breakup and this guy, the dishes in the sink and sleeping in a single bed, and it needs that kind of video. And instead, we get this very sort of contrived narrative about a Japanese merchandise collector, and he's employed this guy to break into a place at night, and he's shining a torch, and he's pulling Sergeant Pepper costumes out of drawers and stealing the Hofner bass and everything. And it's like, what's this got to do with the song? A complete mismatch.
yeah. Yeah, a lot of videos were like that. I mean, and the ones, when you get into like the hair bands, everything is the same. The girls stepping out of the cars, it just became a trope, or a parody of itself, really. So yeah, there were some stinkers in there, but yeah, I mean, I can't blame McCartney too much on that one, just because, yeah, there was just a lot of really rough videos out at the time, and it's really hard to come up with new ideas. And some of the songs that, if it's a love song, I mean, how do you keep showing that over and over? So, yeah, My Brave Face, I don't remember that video at all, actually. That wasn't a big hit over here. That was the one he thought was going to be number one, and it maybe got into the top 20, and it just kind of fizzled out. So,
John, do you want to mention
Another
some of them? Okay, go on. It's okay.
interesting point, which a lot of people, when they read the book, were surprised to learn, is that where they filmed the video for Say Say Say, Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson, they filmed it in what later became the Neverland Ranch. Michael Jackson bought that ranch later. Obviously, it went back to its original owners or something. But it's funny how that was it. That was the origin of that place, which obviously became infamous later, as we know.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, Michael Jackson. Well, he was kind of the video guy for a while there. Everything was with the Thriller album, and that just changed it changed music, really, the music industry with that video, and just so much emphasis on videos, which I think was not good for music long term, but it just was what we had to go through, and what everybody had to go through during that time.
Well, John and I depart company several times as we get into the 1980s, because we do make the point in the introduction, we are two authors, not one. Therefore, you're not going to get a kind of, complete agreement from either of us about the song or the video. And as we get into the 80s, I'm a bit younger than John, so I tend to remember those videos quite nostalgically, things like Say Say Say,
Oh
and
yeah. Mhm.
whereas John, he's a bit older than me, and I think by that point he was looking. the Jackson collaboration, the say. Well, I'll let you talk, John, because you've got opinions, haven't you, about about the say video?
I just found it cheesy, but you're spot on about our age difference because when I was 14 and watching With a Little Luck on Top of the Pops, I couldn't see anything wrong with it at all, and absolutely won't criticize it to this day. And so it's funny when you're 14, you're very impressionable, and stuff goes in and stays with you. And then when you get to like 16, 17, you go through this kind of rebellious phase of thinking that ABBA is shit and whatever. It doesn't last very long, but it's funny how those late teenage years you become a bit more critical. And then I suppose as you get into your 20s, well, here we are sort of trying to review McCartney's latest release when he's 83. So the journey is endless, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it'll end soon, but this whole video thing, I remember that whole MTV period. When you talk to people back talking about songs back then, sometimes they won't talk, they'll remember the video, and that's what gets talked about over the song. I always find that interesting. I didn't see a lot of videos, so if they're trying to tell me about the video, I can never understand what they're talking about. But they talk about that instead of the song. And that was the time when maybe it was a good thing that the industry went that direction, that you could describe the song through visuals much more easily and communicate that way. I hadn't thought of that, but that maybe was one of the benefits of it. But very few good videos were made, of any kind of like, with any kind of like artistic statement. There were some, but very few, unlike the music of the day.
Well, one thing we discovered, which we kind of knew already as we got into the 80s, is that big budgets and big name directors are no guarantee of quality. I mean, McCartney did do some good work later on, but he also did some very big videos that were basically subpar, despite having these absolutely huge budgets. And when I say subpar, I mean it's purely subjective. It's just what you like and what you don't like. But if you take a video such as Off the Ground, which you can tell there was a making of documentary, I think, that was part of that. And I think McCartney and everybody involved in that video were convinced that they were making some great pioneering video that was going to be seen in years to come as this absolutely stunning, where Paul sort of glides through the window and he's sort of, flying above the clouds and he's flying above certain locations. You just watch it and you think it just looks terrible. It just looks like it's just not impressive on any level. And he must have spent a fortune. I mean, he did that with the Star Wars crew. He was, the Industrial
Hmm.
Light and Magic people, and he did go to a lot of effort, and it didn't always pay off. So
Was that his idea? Did he write that?
I think so. Yeah, I think he had the idea for flying above the clouds, and it was an example of where it's just too literal. Off the ground.
Oh
It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
okay. And what's quite
yeah.
ironic, obviously, because the song says, it doesn't take much to get off the ground or something, but clearly it does because he had to spend an absolute fortune and rely on the expertise of so many people to create this sort of naff illusion of him flying through the
Yes.
clouds. And of
And in
course, it
20
flopped. It flopped as well.
and in 2026, nothing has changed. You have to go to quite a lot of effort to make something a hit for a very short period of time. So, yeah, I mean, that's how it's done. And I do remember the Off the Ground period. I bought that album, that CD, because that was the first he was touring that year, and that's the first time I'd ever seen him. And I got excited. I bought the album. And I do remember the quality of those videos were more uh I just bigger budget. He that would have been his decision. I mean, in the 80s, a very good video, you had to spend 200 grand on it if you wanted to do a good job on one. And it was very difficult for a lot of bands to do that. That's why you had a lot of concert footage stuff being done because that was a little bit cheaper. You're already there, the lighting's all there, so you would cobble together live footage, and that worked for a lot of people. But yeah, it's really hard to do a good video that has a good theme. And like you said, James, if it doesn't really relate to the music, what is it you're actually watching?
Yeah. I mean, John, you can talk about Press, can't you? Because I mean, we both love that video. It's just a great example of a cheap video that's just absolutely splendid.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, basically, Paul just had the idea to go down onto the London Underground, round the corner from his office in Soho Square, take a ghetto blaster with him and a single cameraman, and basically film himself on the tube, mingling with the public, singing this song. And that's what it did. And it looks as if it took 10 minutes. It probably took a couple of hours. But he's got people singing along. He's got people kissing him. He's got people not recognizing him. It's got the whole gamut, and it's absolutely fascinating. And it's as we've said, I'm not sure if we point it out in the book, but it's a quite interesting contrast between the video having he's rediscovering his common touch with the people, whereas the music he was making at the time, press to play, he was kind of alienating himself from his popular base to an extent. So
Mm.
it's a return to form on the video front, at
Hmm.
least.
Yeah, I had never seen that video. I have to check that one out because the song Press was not a hit here. I think it was a big hit in England, wasn't it? Pretty sizable hit, I believe. He was still having big hits in the later 80s, more so in the UK than here.
Mm.
He was nosediving. His last top 10 in the States was 1985, and that was Spies Like Us, I think. That was his last top 10 hit here. He hasn't been able to get another one in the top 10 since. So, yeah, he was video wise, he was also, the videos weren't helping him place higher on the charts, that's for sure. But I mean, look what was this competition. There was a lot of other things going on. You got Bon Jovi and all that stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, he plowed a huge amount of money and resources into promoting Pretty Little Head as well from Press to Play. That was directed by Steve Barron, who'd done Billie Jean for Michael Jackson. And there are three different filming locations of the Gower Peninsula. There's Settle in Yorkshire on the big old viaduct there. Loads of kind of early. Would it have been No, it wouldn't have been CGI, would it, in 1986? But sort of computer generated
Hmm.
stuff of some kind,
Hmm.
huge amount of effort. And I mean, the song is just not a single, is it? Pretty Little Head. It's an interesting deep cut, but it's not single material. So just interesting that he would plow again, so many resources and so much money into promoting a song like that in that way.
Yeah, I think he was looking to have hits, and strong videos typically would help you with that, but in this case it didn't. It just was a tough time for him. It's a different age. He was in his 40s. It just was a tough time to be popular at that age. So,
But even go back to the late 70s, because he recorded a video for, I think it was about seven of the songs on Back to the Egg, with a view to promoting the album. But we couldn't find one UK screening of those videos at the time of the album's release. It finally got shown as a 30-minute special in 1981, 2 years after the album's come out. No use to man or dog. And I think it had one showing in a cinema in Finsbury or something, Finsbury Park, and I don't think it got shown in the US that we didn't manage to track down a US screening, did we, James?
No, I don't think so. No. And as you say, yeah, it was 2 years after the album came out. It was finally shown on the small screen in the UK.
well, I have to believe that sometimes you plan for these things and there's just no place to show them. I mean, those things fall through. Whatever he was
Mm.
planning on, where that was being shown, I mean, some of the best plans are laid to waste. They just don't pan out. So that's probably what happened because why wouldn't you show it? I mean, there were so few opportunities to show stuff like that pre-1980, or pre-83. I guess you had to it was really quite a risk to make those.
Well, as I
But,
said, I
but
mean, the natural place for it would have been Saturday morning kids' TV. I mean, ELO did something similar in 1979. They put together a package of videos to promote, I think, nearly every song on Discovery, I think the album Discovery. And I definitely saw that being shown. I think
Mm.
clips of it were shown on Blue Peter, which is a kids' TV show in the evening, and I'm sure I saw it on Saturday morning kids' telly
Okay.
as well. So
Yeah, we
who
didn't have
knows?
that here in the States. Saturday morning was pretty much just for cartoons, and there was no really rock stuff unless there was we had a couple goofy shows that had like fictitious rock bands in them, but no place to really show videos like that at all. That would have been more for the Soul Trains or some of the I guess the music shows that were on, Solid Gold. You might see stuff on there. That would be the only places you could see stuff at that time. So, and those were more later period, late night shows, not for kids. So that's interesting that they show them on kids programming in England.
Mm.
Yeah,
We
I
had
just
these live shows. Go ahead,
sorry,
John.
I just want to make the point that despite the fact that maybe some of these videos were not shown at the time, and there's a lot of videos in this book which are hardly seen by anyone, we're very glad that they exist because they provide an absolutely magical visual sort of soundtrack or, sorry, video track to a lot of the stuff that we grew up with in the 70s and 80s. And we're very glad that Wings recorded all those videos for Back to the Egg, even though they never got shown. And we're glad that Ringo did all those late 70s videos for Hey Baby and You Don't Know Me at All, because they're just priceless to watch.
Yeah, I had no idea they did this many. I was shocked to see that you've got 71 listed in here. And it's like, wow, I would have thought, well, maybe each one of them had about, maybe 10. But yeah, that's a lot more than that. So yeah, I think it shows that they were always trying to marry video with their music. And, sometimes it's hit and miss. But there's some really good ones they came up with that are priceless, as you say, John.
Yeah, four separate videos for Mary Had a Little Lamb. I think two of which got shown, I think.
Okay. Well, I suppose you try to get, I don't know, that's a lot. As someone who's been in the filmmaking industry a little bit, usually you go with your best idea, and that's what you do. And you don't do four different ones hoping one's gonna, stick. That's always never served me well, but whatever. It happens. He was learning. He was learning.
Yeah.
And there's I won't spoil it for you, but the video for You Don't Know Me at All with Ringo, he's completely bald. And if you want to know why, then you have to buy our book because we go into the story in a lot of detail via his then fiancee Nancy Andrews, and it's just absolutely hilarious.
Good. Well, hey, a cliffhanger is the best way to end a video. So, gentlemen, let's end it right there. And please go out and check this book out. It's a very good read. I think you're going to be very impressed with it. And for those of you who are solo Beatle fans, I think it's now an important part of the history. So it should be on your bookshelves. I'll leave some links below so you guys can just with a couple clicks purchase it. And James and John, thank you so much for joining us here. And hopefully you'll be back for perhaps a sequel or another book.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, a great honor to be on this show. Thanks very much.
And we'll be seeing plenty more writers here on Pop Goes the 60s, so make sure to stop back. Thanks for watching.